We're good to go whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Joe. This is John Gregg, Mayor of the town of Seabrook Island. We are convening this afternoon on November 9th, 2021 for the town's November Ways and Means Committee meeting. I call the meeting to order. We will dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance and the roll call, and I will ask that the town clerk confirm that notice of this meeting has been posted as is appropriate and that the other requirements of the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act have been satisfied.
They have.
Thank you for that. Before we begin on the agenda, I would just like to recognize that joining our meeting is our newly hired zoning administrator stroke chief code enforcement officer, Tyler Newman. Tyler, if you would wave and say hi to everyone. We have Jerry Finke, Councilwoman Finke on for sure. We have Barry Goldstein, Councilman Goldstein on. I am not seeing Pat Fox, so I can't say for sure that she's on, but apart from those luminaries, I will also note that Dan Cortvalesi, who was just elected to town council and will be sworn in January, is also on this video conference. Dan, you can smile and wave if you would like. Thank you. Those introductions being made, I now see that Pat is on, so we can, hello, Pat. We can begin slogging our way through the agenda. And the first items on the agenda are my items, so I will begin with the first of those, a discussion of a request for a special election for a referendum concerning short-term rentals. Members have received an email request that the town hold a special election for a proposed referendum concerning regulation of short-term rentals. The request proposes that the special election be held in February of 2022. I remind members that at the October council meeting, I proposed that the town's ad hoc committee for short-term rentals be reinvigorated with a charge to identify factual inquiries that are implicated by the recent petition, referendum, and related materials, all to the effect of seeking that the town implement a cap on short-term rentals. Until topics for factual inquiry have been identified, inquiries made, and the results of those inquiries are provided to council, council has insufficient basis for evaluating whether further regulation of short-term rentals is needed, and if so, the nature of such further regulation. I contemplate that the ad hoc committee for short-term rentals will keep council apprised of the progress being made in the ordinary course of reporting at future council meetings. I invite comments and suggestions from member of council. While no vote will be taken today concerning the request for a special election, it is my expectation that council will vote at the November council meeting in respect to the request. For now, I will be soliciting members to offer their comments, if any, concerning policy implications of the request. And as we ordinarily do, I'll try to poll members of council in John Gregg's alphabetical order. So with that being said, Jerry, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Trying to do this quickly. Even though the ad hoc committee hasn't kind of been actively reporting to council, I did want to say that Pat has continued to work on the short-term rental issue through service and representing the town on SEPOA's long-range planning. And I think through all the implementation, our town administrator did a lot of the work on the welcome packets, et cetera. And I hope that the input and the editing and suggestions that Pat and I had with Joe through that was helpful. And we've kind of stayed in touch with the rental agency and folks about rental issues and reporting back to Joe. So even though we haven't been making an official report, we've been out there keeping an eye on stuff. That said, with the mayor's request, Pat and I have exchanged emails, and we are going to meet on Thursday and kind of come up with our plan of action of who we should meet with, how we should put together more focus groups with the stakeholders, both sides of this issue, talking to the club and SEPOA to gather all the information we need that we can report back to council as soon as possible with some hard numbers so that when we do make a policy decision, it's data driven. And that's the end of my comment for now.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Pat, anything to add? You might need to be unmuted.
Mute me.
There you go.
Okay. As Jerry said, I'm on the Long Range Planning Committee, and they have a subcommittee on short-term rentals. So I've been immersed in this, even though we haven't been meeting as an ad hoc committee. I have a lot of, they are the short-term rental ad hoc committee for the Long Range Planning Committee for SEPOA, has collected a lot of data, and they're still collecting data. And so, as Jerry said, I think we need to really look at a tremendous amount of data that's going to be coming in, and also other aspects of that's coming around. So she and I will be talking this week, and hopefully we'll get this up and running. That's my thoughts. That's
very good. Thank you very much. And Barry, any comments at this point?
So just to clarify, so we're going to have a vote in November on whether we want a referendum. Is that what you brought up earlier?
We have a request for a special election. So essentially, the special election is for the purpose of holding the referendum. And the only thing that we'll be voting on is whether or not we will in fact hold the special election. Now, at this stage, you will understand that both SEPOA and the town are undertaking to collect information. So it may be, well, it is probably premature, since our November council meeting will be next week, for us to make an informed decision about whether or not we will have any need to go forward with a special election in February. But we don't vote at these meetings. As you understand, it's a committee meeting, so the council would not have authority to take votes. And the first opportunity that we would have to be able to vote on that request will be the November council meeting.
Okay, I understand. Well, I guess my first thoughts are it would be critical for Jerry and her committee to speak to the people that brought this petition up. I mean, I think that is the first group they should speak to. They're the ones who brought this issue to the forefront. They're the ones who want something done. And I think before we go anywhere, I mean, before we speak to anybody else, they should be the ones the town talks to find out exactly what they want, why they did this, and what they see the outcome of this being. So that's my first thoughts. I mean, jumping ahead and making a committee and studying things and doing everything does seem reasonable. But the first question is, what problems do Mr. McLaughlin and his group see that we need to solve? And nothing can be done. There should be no studying done until someone talks to them about it. The issue on the referendum, whether it's appropriate to bring it up or not now, I guess my personal opinion is there's just some simple things that have to go through. One was, is it a legal request? And according to Joe, there really is no basis for anything to say that it wasn't illegal. What they're requesting, the town can do. The second thing, I guess the question is, they submitted a petition with a significant number of voters that seem to appear to want to see the town to do something. I don't know how many voters. I don't know whether that's a majority, a minority. I don't really know. My next thought was, what they're requesting is not crazy. I mean, there are plenty of towns that have done this, including our neighbor Kiowa. So what they're requesting isn't something we should just dismiss and go, well, this is crazy. This can't be put to the voters. They're requesting a non-binding referendum, which means we don't have to do something. And so the question, I think, is what they're asking is somewhat of a gray area. It's something to do with livability on the island. And I think the voters have every right to give us their opinion. If we get an overwhelming response, well, then it's something we should probably seriously look at. If we get an underwhelming response, it's something we don't have to look at. And I do think it's important that the town realizes that a significant number of people that are affected by this can't vote. And I don't think that's a minor issue. I realize that they cannot vote, but at the same time, we represent the town and the town elected us, therefore we represent the voters. And I'm not saying that other people don't have as much right to speak and have input, but I do think it's important that the voters get their chance to tell us what they want. I don't think it's unreasonable to find out if we get an overwhelming response they want us to look into this thing, then we should look hard into it. If we get an overwhelming response that it's not that important, then it's not that important. That's, I guess, my opinion about this whole thing, that we do have at least an obligation to the voters to let them speak their mind. Otherwise, we're just kind of disregarding their opinion. And this isn't a black and white issue. This is a gray issue about livability on the island. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Mayor, can I just follow up with Barry? I mean,
Jerry, you can follow up with all of council, but before you do that, I will thank Barry for his comments.
That's right.
And then, but before you proceed, I will remind members of council that I had noted at the last council meeting that the referendum is objectionable in the sense that the referendum will allow only the registered voters to be heard. And of course, the people that are going to be impacted are a much broader group than just the registered voters. So I don't view the referendum as an innocent inquiry into how many people support having caps on short-term rentals. I really think that it's intended to drive council to take action. So I made that point at the council meeting and I have not changed my view. Now, Jerry, if you wish, please proceed.
I just wanted to agree with Barry that yes, of course, we're going to talk to the authors of the petition and the people that drove it. I think they're probably on the top of the list. It's just, I think Pat and I want to talk about the forum. Do we put them in the same room with the other side of the issue? Do we talk to them separately? Pat and I just want to kind of have a game plan before we start approaching people. But of course, we will talk to them. But that said, I really think it's important we have the data. their petition starts with the sentence, there's been an explosion of rentals. We can't confirm that, and that's what we're looking at. Let's start with some data about what's actually going on in our rental market. So that's my only follow-up. That's it.
Thank you, Jerry, and I certainly support that position that there were assertions made in the petition and the referendum and the related materials that we have no way of knowing just out here in the ether about whether or not those things are supported by facts. And that was the reason that I had asked that the ad hoc committee be reinvigorated and identify topics for factual inquiry, and then make those inquiries, collect the information, and share it with council so we'll have a better handle on what is really going on. So thank you.
I would agree, and maybe after speaking to Mr. McLaughlin's group, maybe this isn't the time to have a referendum, but at the same time, starting with him as the beginning conversation makes sense, because maybe he'll agree once you lay out how you see it proceeding, maybe he'll say this is not the time to have a referendum. But as to your comment, John, I don't think I agree. Everything we do, we're elected by the voters, and so the voters elect us. I don't see that even just a general vote as we are disenfranchising those who can't vote. That's just the way the system's set up. I mean, if you had told me this is a binding referendum, I'd say you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be doing this. But in a non-binding referendum, that's the way the system's set up. And I do believe the voters have a right. If after you speak to Mr. McLaughlin and we can come to some agreement, maybe he doesn't want to have a referendum, but maybe we need to find out what the town feels, because this isn't an issue, I think, that absolute data is going to drive it. If people feel like there's a problem, then obviously there's a problem. So anyways, that concludes my discussion, I guess.
All right, thank you, Barry.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
I think we've heard them loud and clear. I mean, they had 400 people on a petition. I don't see, I think we're moving ahead in what they want us to do. I want to point out that if the statistics on our website that Joe put up there about the election, there are 2,386 people who can vote, voters that are registered. We only had 475 vote on last week's election. I don't know whether it's worth the cost of having a referendum when we hear them loud and clear and we're ready to go to the table and talk. We can't, I mean, I guess I'm going to ask Barry, do you think there's a reason to have a referendum on something that we already hear loud and clear?
No, like I said, I'm not, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating for the issue. That is not my point at this meeting. I'm not advocating for the issue. I agree with everybody that I think the issue needs to be studied. It needs to be moved slowly. And personally, maybe the issue really isn't caps. It's maybe controlling behavior, which the town has less of control than SIPOA does. I think there's a lot of other issues that need to be looked at. I'm just saying it's a bad precedent to have, in my mind, to have 400 voters show up at your door, knock on your door and say, there's something really important and we would like to get the poll. And to your point, Pat, I think it's well taken. It is, we only got 400 people to vote. If you put this out there and you only got 250 people for and 200 and something against, your answer is it's not that important. If you got 1,000 people voting that this is an important issue, well, then we would sit up and go, wow, we better take a look at this really carefully. So I'm just saying, it's an issue that appears to have a significant number of people, considering the number of people that vote, wanting us to look at. And like I said, I'm hoping Jerry meets with Mr. McLaughlin and his group there, and the outcome is there's a better way to go forward than doing a referendum, which really, like I said, is non-binding. It's not doing anything except giving us some voters' opinions. And I'm hoping you come up with a better way forward, that we start a process to make whatever that group wants us to do, reasonable. I mean, I hope it's a better way than, I don't think the referendum's solving anything. That's my other opinion. It doesn't solve anything, but at the same time, they have done everything that I think requires the town to say, wow, they want a referendum. They have enough votes. It's a reasonable thing. It's not crazy. They've met everything that I think requires that we should say, yeah, we should have a vote on a referendum. So I am in hopes that Jerry comes up and says, oh, no, I've talked to them, that we can come up with a better way to do this than just a referendum. But at the same time, like I said, it's not the issue. It's the point of they have done everything that I think meets the requirements for the town to take notice and say, well, I guess they can have a referendum.
Okay.
Hey, Tyler, welcome to short-term rentals. We have
Okay.
lots to talk to you about.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Pat. So on to the next topic. Discussion of resident requests for relief under the town's business license requirements. Members have been provided correspondence from a resident who asserts that he engages in photography as a hobby and sells note cards and calendars in connection with that hobby. The resident has requested that council consider the requirements of the town's business license ordinance and whether a carve-out should be made for hobbyists or residents who sell anything on the island. In particular, the request is to be relieved of a requirement to obtain any business license whatsoever for such sales, as I understand it. It is noted that the town's ordinance exempts payment of fees for sale of personal items at the owner's residence, as in so-called garage sales, but requires that the seller register information required with the license inspector. And the license inspector, in this case, I believe, would be our town administrator. Further, current practice is to issue single-day licenses for a nominal fee to artists and craftsmen to sell items at art shows, craft shows, and events. Neither of those two regimes provide the specific relief sought by the resident. The new model business license ordinance the town will be adopting would allow the town to create specific subclasses under, as I understood it from correspondence from our town administrator, under class 9, that could accommodate specific rates but would not appear to eliminate the need for a license. In that regard, I will invite our town administrator to comment further in respect of subclasses under class 9 of the model ordinance that the town will be adopting.
Sure. Now, before I do that, I do want to distinguish between, I know the term hobbyist was thrown around many times. A hobbyist is somebody who's out taking pictures for, in this particular instance, for their own personal use or, to give away or share without compensation. Once you start selling, whatever your product is, in this particular case, it's not even just selling the pictures, it's selling, I understand, products containing the pictures. That is a retail sale. There's nothing really that differentiates that between anybody else who's selling any other good or service in return for payment. So if this is a road we want to go down, you can't just pick and choose necessarily who's going to get a special exemption and who's not. We'd have to have something that's very objective. What we have in the ordinance that we'll be talking about in a little while, the new business license ordinance, is basically creating a new class 9 category, which would be for a specific business license class, which basically covers like artist, craft person, performing arts, things of that nature. And what we've recommended to be included is basically, and this is consistent with what we're doing right now, this isn't establishing something new, if they're coming in basically for like a single day event, or in this case, we actually put it at an event not to exceed 3 days. So if they're going to an art show or something like that, and they are a qualified vendor under that business license class, then they would still have to have a license. There's not a provision in the model ordinance to, just say this one doesn't have to have a license. They would still have to have a license, but we would have what I would say is a more favorable fee schedule with a reduced base fee and no variable fee. The base fee covers the first $2,000 in income generally, and a variable fee covers any $1,000 or fraction thereof over $2,000. So what we've included in the draft ordinance that we'll look at later in the meeting is carving out a special provision. It's essentially continuing what we have on the books, allowing artist, craftsperson, those type things, but only for those special events. It would have to be on the premises of where that event takes place and only during the duration of that event. And that's really designed for somebody who's not doing business, selling or advertising on a daily basis on the island over the course of a year. That's primarily for someone who's coming in maybe for 1 day a year or for a couple days a year, and acting as a vendor at a particular event or activity. If you wanted to broaden that, there's not a business license classification for a hobbyist, because a hobbyist is not a business. A hobbyist is a hobbyist. If you wanted to go in and create a whole bunch of other subcategories, I could tell you we have a coin dealer. When we first approached him about needing a license, he said he was a hobbyist. I said, "Are you selling coins?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You're not a hobbyist, you're a business." We have other photographers who have licenses and have had licenses for several years. To what extent they're selling their services, I don't know every single one personally, but I'm sure there are others who are also out there doing, at least a part of their activity is just for hobby purposes, but maybe selling goods or services. I'm sure there's countless others out there too. So, if that's something you wanted to do, we could, but we basically have to go in and identify every business license class that one might consider a hobbyist, and pull out and create an exemption for every single one of those. I certainly would not recommend doing that, one, because it would take probably months to go through the entire list, but two, I can see continuing our past precedent of having the vendor permit just for a day or a couple days. They're out there probably just for a few hours selling things that they've produced, artwork and whatnot. I can see a differentiation between something like that and, a full-on business who's out there 365 days a year advertising and selling goods and services. But, to me, there's a very strong distinction between a hobbyist and a business. And if you are selling your goods and services over the course of the year, if you are doing it for any sort of financial gain, which is basically what our ordinance defines as a business, you're doing it for the purpose of gain, then to me, that's a business, and there's really not a basis for carving that out. If we do want to do that, I think, we would have to pull back from this ordinance. We would probably have to get the town attorney involved, because at that point, we would be differing potentially dramatically from the new state statute that was adopted, the definitions and everything, and the process and procedure that's in the model ordinance. And to just say, we're going to pull out one class because, someone feels that they shouldn't have to obtain a business license. I don't think that's the appropriate way to go forward. But if that's something council wants to do, then, we can certainly look at it.
Thank you, Joe. You have confirmed what my understanding was, and that is that under the model ordinance that the town will be adopting, there would be no exception for the need for a business license for the sales that are being made by people who are making sales of things that derive from their hobby. So that is, I think, fundamental to this inquiry. At this point, I will point out that while council will not be voting today in respect of this matter, I do solicit comments of members, if any, concerning the policy implications of the requested relief. And again, I will be happy to proceed in John Gregg's alphabetical order. So Councilwoman Finke, if you have any comments to offer, please do so.
I would just say that I support Joe's proposal of using that class 9 to carve something out for the artists, photographers, craftsmen, that we're still consistent with what we're required to do under state law, but we could set a fee schedule that's not very burdensome. But I think we need to do that so we're being consistent in the application of the ordinance and what we have to do by state statute, and not just kind of pick and choose that we have, okay, here's what you have to do. I like the idea of staying with, when the Art Guild has their 2 or 3 day art show, that there can just be one license that covers everybody that's selling that day. Because I'm certain that there's artists that show that day and sell, that's probably the only time of year, once, twice, 3 times they have that show. So I'm supportive of what Joe has proposed.
I don't, just to clarify, I don't believe we can do a license just to the organizer of the event to cover all vendors at the
Oh,
event.
we can't. We have
This would be a license issued to each individual vendor at the event, because each individual vendor is, in a sense, its own business. We would get down a real slippery slope if we started allowing, the presenter of an event or activity, because I can tell you, I hear more complaints about contractors saying, why do I, as the contractor, have to get a license? We're collecting $500,000 to build this house, so I'm paying a license on $500,000. And then, you have all these subcontractors who they are all treated as individual businesses. So if the general contractor is paying them, for some portion of the project, they are also paying on their gross income as well. So if we were going to say, well, we're going to allow the organizer of event to get one license to cover everything, I can promise you'll probably have every contractor banging the door down, asking why they can't get that same treatment, and why, all of them have to obtain a separate license when we're treating, one particular group different. So I would not go that route, but I certainly think it would be appropriate and legal and consistent with what we have been doing, to continue allow each of those vendors to get, a 1 day or 2 day or 3 day or whatever the length of that event is, to cover their sales. There was a comment made about, I think in the email it said, no vendors are getting licensed. And of course, that's not true. We have, a bunch of vendors who do come in to obtain licenses for, art shows and different events. I would not go out and say every single one of them has come in to get a license as they're supposed to do. But I think that's something that we could address probably through better communication with the organizers of the events, to make sure that if they're allowing a vendor to come in, that they at the very least should notify them that they do need to have a license from the town.
So I take my comment back and admit I totally misunderstood the discussion and some of the email exchanges. So I still, I mean, so we're not doing the event thing. I understand that slippery slope makes perfect sense, but if we did this subclass, I just would like to make sure our fee schedule is not very burdensome, that it's just some nice basic little fee.
Yeah,
So that
right.
we can catch those people.
In the draft ordinance right now, it's our current ordinance is a $25 flat fee.
Uh-huh.
And the new draft ordinance, we've actually dropped it to a $20 flat fee for the first 2,000, but then we have 0 for the variable rate. So it's whatever they do over the course of that event or activity. It's just a flat $20 license fee.
Okay, great.
You know, that could be $10, it could be 15, it could be 20, it could be 5, it could be whatever you want it to be. We have the ability to set those rates, but again, it's something that every individual vendor would have to have, not a blanket license that would cover all of those vendors.
Do we have the ability, Joe, to set that up online right now so people wouldn't have to trudge into town hall, that they could just say, oh, this event's coming up, I'm going to participate and do it online? You know, go to the town website and do it?
Not currently. As part of the transition to the new model ordinance, there's going to be a requirement that we participate in a portal. So individuals would be able to go into that portal. I don't know if they'd be able to do it the first time, but for renewals and subsequent years, I know they would have the ability to go into the portal to do that. We'll talk a little bit later too about some credit card stuff that we have on the horizon. There may be some more opportunities to make it a little bit more efficient for individuals to do that without necessarily having to come to town hall, but we can cover that a little bit later.
Okay, that would be, I would be supportive of, like I said, making it as least burdensome as possible for our area artists who do it as a hobby but are selling it as a business. And end of my comment, sorry.
Thank you, Jerry. Pat, anything?
Just that I support the idea of the standard, following the standard and not trying to circumvent this for special people or things. I think we might want to think about the $20 fee and make it less. $10 seems just fine to me. I don't know how much these people really sell. Have an artist myself. I know I'm always excited. I used to sell and always excited when you sell a piece, but I think it's just an education thing too, that as Joe said, the person who's putting on the show, like SAPOA, when they have it at the lake house, just reminding everybody that they need a business license, and that it just be a nominal fee. I think that's fine. I agree with what Joe proposed.
All right, thank you, Pat. Barry?
Okay, well, I think some of the confusion may be that how the town and the state define a business is different than how the IRS defines a business and a hobby. I mean, the IRS has specific, I think there's 9 things that they point out that you have to address, whether it's a hobby or not. So I guess the real question is it the intent of the town to try to get a business license from every hobbyist? And I'm more concerned actually with the in-town residents. If you're coming from out of town to do a show here, I have no problem making them get a business license. I'm more interested in trying to address those residents who do this really as a hobby, but sell some of their wares and paintings or whatever, photography. And I guess the question is, are we addressing that issue by saying we're going to do these one-day things? I don't think that addresses their issue. So if you sell a couple $100 worth of something, are we being unreasonable requesting them to get a $65 permit? Well, I think that's the price of the permit to sell 2 paintings a year. And I don't know what the paintings are worth. I do think we need to look at our residents and say, if it really is a hobby, and I realize there's some definitions that could be brought up, is if it really is a hobby, fine, we can get a fee out of it, but the fee needs to be very nominal. I mean, something like that. And then we need to be fair and equitable, making sure that everyone understands that. I mean, if somebody sells 5 things on that next door out of their garage, is that considered a hobby? Is that considered a business? I mean, if somebody goes 5 times a year and sells something on next door, fishing rods, a kayak, a car for $5,000. If they do it 1 time, they get a permit, but if they do it 5 times, can they get 5 one-day permits, or is that a hobby? I realize it opens a lot of questions, and maybe that's something besides this, but I do think the hobbyists, especially the photographers and craftsmen and painters, probably need some kind of slight relief from the fee, and somehow we can make that out of our system. It would be nice.
Thank you, Barry. Joe, I thought that the existing ordinance tolerated, I'll use the word relief for what were referred to as garage sales. And the other category was when you have an event, but that does not mean that someone who is selling from time to time I'll call it work product of a hobby is excused from having a license. The fact that those 2 regimes don't cover the ongoing occasional sales is neither here nor there. The person that's making those sales requires a license under the ordinance.
That's correct.
So it isn't.
Basically, the definition, I'm going to have the new ordinance pulled up, so I'm going to try to pull that up here. The definition in the new ordinance is really very broad. It defines a business as any, why we use the word business in the definition of business, I'll never understand, but any business, calling, occupation, profession, or activity engaged with the object of gain, benefit, or advantage, either directly or indirectly. That's about as broad of a definition as you could probably think of. As far as what constitutes a business. And, it's really not that different from what we have in the ordinance today. And kind of that differentiator, if you will, that we use for what makes a business and what makes a hobby is the object of gain. So if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it because you enjoy doing it, you want to share stuff, give it away, whatever, that's a hobbyist. There's necessarily no financial gain in that particular instance. But the second you start doing something in return for payment, at that point, under the ordinance, you're no longer a hobbyist, you are a business.
Yeah.
So how does this impact, Barry's point, somebody's selling their fishing rods, or they're redecorating and they're selling a sofa, or it's a moving sale and they're getting rid of extra beds or something, and they might be doing it on Nextdoor. How does this ordinance impact that?
That I don't remember off the top of my head. I have to go back and.
Oh, there's something in here somewhere? I don't remember reading it.
That's not a question I was prepared to answer. I'll have to go back and look through the ordinance if there's some provision for, like personal, where I know the mayor correctly pointed out our current ordinance has if you're just selling your personal items in a garage sale or something like that, that doesn't require a license. But I don't remember off the top of my head, and this is a 21-page document, so it would take me a little time to go all the way through it to find exactly what, if anything, it said.
I know that we're hamstrung a little bit about what we can do because of the state statute, the mandate under it. But if we wanted to make sure that we carved out something like that, could we add that and still be in compliance with the new state law?
We can carve out classes. So you can't just wholeheartedly change the model ordinance. We can't change what constitutes business. We can't change what's considered gross income. We can't change the appeal process. What we have the ability to do under the Class 9 provisions, we can take specific classes of business and pull them out. You have to have a rational basis for doing it. The MASC guidance says, if it has a very small impact on service levels, or if it has a disproportionate impact on service levels, there may be a justification to pull out a certain class. But when you pull out a class, you're not just pulling out one particular business, you're pulling out every business that falls under that class. So if you said, okay, well, a photographer, we're going to say as a hobbyist, and we're going to have them as a separate provision, that means every photographer, which is going to have the same class across the board, is going to have the same rate structure. That could be the one person who sells $200 a year. That could be a photographer that's out there doing 50,000, or doing portraits out on the beach 5 times every weekend. It's by class. So when you pull the class out, you pull every business that's within that class.
There's no way to limit the class by dollar amount as well. So you could say artists and craftsmen, and then we can limit the class could then include artists and craftsmen that are residents of Seabrook Island, and artists and craftsmen that are residents of Seabrook Island that do less than $1,000 worth of business, so that you've got a class that's very specific, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do a target for our residents.
You're getting into very convoluted legal questions that we would have to have our town attorney opine on. I'm not an attorney. I couldn't answer that question.
And I would say that would be tough, because just off the top of my head, I know of two painters off the top of my head that go back and forth between here and Connecticut and sell at the art guild shows, and would not be residents. So we'd have to define that a little differently. But I'm just concerned about Barry's point. If you're selling the fishing rod or the sofa or whatever, that those folks don't have to have we would not ever go after them for a business license for those personal goods sales.
Yeah, I mean, whatever we do, the problem is once we do it, then I think we need to make sure that we broadcast this, advertise it, and make sure that we enforce it so that it's equally sent across everybody, so that we just don't get those people that volunteer the information and say, oh yeah, well, I'm doing it here, I'm on a business license. We now need to enforce it. So that's why we need to step carefully on doing this. I don't know whether, it's not worth changing it. If we don't change it, and we just have to look at enforcing like you said, all these people that sell stuff. If anybody does, if somebody sells a car, on the island, are they getting a business license, and the car transaction could be $20,000? And all of a sudden now we have not been enforcing that. That doesn't seem fair to the person that walked in to get a $65 license to sell, 5 things of pottery twice a year.
I would also keep in mind, the fundamental fairness and the integrity of the ordinance as a whole. We have right now over 2,000 businesses. If we were going to go in and just kind of take a hodgepodge here, there, whatever, there's literally hundreds of classes of business types that we have operating in the town, number one. And second, a lot of businesses that get a license for us report zero income, and they are coming in and paying 65 or 80 or whatever the fee is for a base license. That's just to get them in the door, to go out and advertise their services, to submit proposals to homeowners or whatever. So we literally have, I don't have the exact number, but I know it's at least dozens, potentially 100 or more businesses that are paying just for the privilege of soliciting business out here. They're not even collecting a dime. And a lot of them, may not collect a dime over the course of a year. But we're charging them too. So when we start looking at and saying, well, this one's only doing 100 or 200, there's some out there that are doing absolutely nothing, and there's still an expectation that they're going to come in and obtain a license.
Joe, since we've had this conversation, I'm getting more and more confused. This isn't any different than what we have now for where we're going. They were required to get a license before, is that correct? Supposedly.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So we're
right.
not changing anything. It's just that there are some people who may not have realized that they were supposed to have gotten a license. Something like the short-term renters that didn't realize they were supposed to pay certain types of taxes or get a license to do something. They were just uneducated. We're not really changing anything. Is the fee much higher in the new versus the old?
The fee by and large will be lower. Now, we do have the inside-outside rate. So if it is an outside vendor coming here, they would pay the higher rate. But the base rates for an in-town business, it's going to, again, depend on what type of business it is. So a photographer, maybe one class, a coin dealer, maybe a different class. Across the board, our businesses are going down about 15%. We could look up individual ones and see exactly how much they're going down, but across the board for in-town businesses, the rates will go down under the new ordinance.
So in essence, we're not changing anything other than possibly lowering the rate. The only thing is that some people have awakened to the fact that they should have gotten a business license because they are selling items, small items. And is that correct? Am I correct assumption?
I believe that was the purpose of the email.
Okay.
So
I don't want to speak for the person who sent it, but that's kind of what I would deduce from the message.
Yeah, that was my interpretation, that they didn't realize they were supposed to get a license. And, we're not changing anything. I just, if we can make it lower, it would be nice. But that, as you said, then we've changed the whole everything within that system. And so I don't know, we're not making any changes as far as I'm concerned. We're just sort of saying, yes, you were supposed to have done this for the last couple of years.
Pat, I think that's substantially correct. There is one difference. The existing ordinance of the town would excuse the requirement for having a business license for what can be characterized as a garage sale. So a person that's selling personal items from their residence doesn't have to have a license, but they have to provide information to the town official. In this case, I believe it's the town administrator, about what they're doing. So they don't actually have to get a license, and they wouldn't have to pay a fee for a license, but they still have to provide information to the town official. So that exception or exemption, if you will, would not, as I understand everything that Joe has told us today, is not supported by the model ordinance. There may be an ability to change or specify reduced rates for certain specified subclasses under the model ordinance, but it doesn't eliminate the requirement for a license.
Yeah. Which in essence is just letting the town know they're doing it. I mean, if you think about it, but you have to pay. Okay, I understand better.
All right. Any further questions? Hearing none. The next item on my list is a follow-up from a meeting with representatives of SAPOA concerning short-term rentals. On November 5th, the mayor pro tem and I participated in a video conference with representatives of SAPOA. That would be the Seabrook Island Property Owners Association, for those who aren't familiar with our abbreviations, to discuss matters pertaining to regulation of short-term rentals. It was noted that SAPOA is bound by the restrictive covenants, which do not currently limit short-term rentals. An amendment of the restrictive covenants would require a vote by property owners. Conversely, SAPOA's long-range planning committee is currently engaged in data gathering and has been working with the Council of Villa Associations and Regimes to improve information that SAPOA has regarding concerns of regimes pertaining to short-term rentals. That effort is ongoing, and SAPOA contemplates sharing information it collects with the town. As noted with reference to the town's ad hoc committee for short-term rentals, the town is also undertaking to gather data that will inform consideration of whether further regulation of short-term rentals is warranted. I note that Councilwoman Fox participates in the SAPOA Long-Range Planning Committee meetings and is a member of the town's ad hoc committee for short-term rentals. I invite her to comment further concerning the ongoing work of both. Pat?
Not disturb is now enabled. Thank you.
Okay. I just spent 3 hours with short-term, probably 4 hours or 5 hours Monday and this morning with them. So it's hard to consolidate all of that. But as far as short-term rentals go, the committee, the ad hoc committee, has put out a survey from the regimes and the associations. Out of the 40 regimes that there's 41, but they don't count the Marina. So they only did inside the gate. 32 responded, and we have been looking at that information as a committee. I think that's the most I can share right now at this point in time. There's also been a short-term rental benchmarking report from 11 beach communities, finding out how many beach communities have short-term rentals and what type of problems they have. The committee has found or identified, I believe, 4 or 5 beach communities that we are going to explore more. And certainly I will be able to share that with Jerry. And we discussed the fact that there be some sharing of information between the town's ad hoc committee and the property owners association ad hoc committee on short-term rentals. So possibly have a meeting or something where we can share this information. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Pat. Any questions for Pat? Hearing none. I think the effort of both SAPOA and the town is responsive to the request that underlies the desire to have a special election for a referendum. That is to say, both SAPOA and the town are looking into concerns of residents with regard to short-term rentals. So I consider both organizations, I consider that to reflect that both organizations are responding to what amounts to the concerns that have been expressed by the former petition with referendum and the current request for a special election. And with that, the next item that I have to cover is a follow-up from a meeting with Mike Schuler. On November 3rd, I had a conversation with Mike Schuler, the principal of the owners of Bohicket Marina. In advance of the meeting, I provided Mr. Schuler the town's Seabrook Island Road Corridor Concepts presentation. And following the meeting, I provided him the town's Seabrook Island Road Drainage Evaluation presentation. Mr. Schuler expressed support for improvements reflected in the Corridor Concepts presentation and offered to assist the town with its efforts at improving Seabrook Island Road. Of course, his business has, I guess, connections and contacts from various contractors that he would be happy to share with the town as we move forward with work that we are proposing to do. Mr. Schuler indicated that work has been undertaken at the marina to address issues known to the town, including occurrences of sinkholes that had developed a few years ago along the boardwalk to the townhouses, as well as residential uses at a marina retail structure. The marina owners are continuing to pursue plans to make further improvements at the marina and have been contacted by businesses interested in occupying space at the marina. Mr. Schuler confirmed that he has been in touch with representatives of the town of Kiowa Island concerning the proposed MUSC facility at the parcel at 1884 Seabrook Island Road, formerly occupied by Miss Lulu's. He shared a site plan drawing that reflected a proposed curb cut at Andel Bluff Boulevard, that's the road leading into the marina, in addition to the existing curb cut on Seabrook Island Road. So it was just sort of a informal conversation, an opportunity for me to meet with him and for him to offer his assistance to the town as we are pursuing improvements to both the road and the drainage for Seabrook Island Road. And my last item is a comment concerning proposed development on Johns Island, identified as the Island Park Place Medical Health and Wellness Village. Charleston County Planning Commission workshop was held November 8th, at which a proposed plan development at a parcel on Betsy Carrison Parkway, identified as the Island Park Place Medical Health and Wellness Village, was considered. The town has been copied on comments submitted to Charleston County by 2 residents expressing opposition to the proposed development. In addition, on November 4th, the Johns Island Task Force submitted a comment opposing the development. I have distributed copies of the workshop presentation to members of council. I will point out to you that in the materials that I have already distributed, there are comments that were received in connection with that presentation to Charleston County Planning Commission. At this point, I invite questions by members concerning this proposed development to the extent that I know anything, that is, of course. Gary, yes.
I'm assuming I get to start. So I have like 3 or 4 questions, comments, and then like a suggestion or request. I did watch the Planning Commission meeting and the discussion and presentation and everything. And because I'd listened in on a couple of Johns Island Task Force meetings, I'd heard rumblings about this development, or the owner of that property wanted to develop it. I certainly didn't realize it was so far along that they had the conceptual drawings and were going to the county. And apparently neither did most everybody that lives in Kiowa River Estates after you watch the commission meetings. So and maybe you can't answer these, Mr. Mayor. So we have MUSC coming in, and then here's this developer that wants to do a medical village. Certainly a doctor can open up an office wherever he wants, but they talked about infusion therapy and a lot of things in this development. Do they have to do a certificate of need like MUSC did? I mean, there was no mention of that in the hearing or the workshop. And so that's one question. And then my second question is, when they're presenting this, they're like, oh, our sewer is going to be from Seabrook Island because Seabrook Island has to provide it to us under County Ordinance 2078. So I went and read 2078, which only to me reads, we can't condition sewer service on annexation, but we don't have to give it to them. But they presented it as, oh, well, we're just going to use Seabrook Island sewer for this big development. And if that doesn't work out, we'll just do septic tanks. But here's this ordinance, they're going to have to provide it to us. And for the rest of council, if you didn't see this, they want to rezone residential to commercial with a planned development. So my concern is, well, this sounds great. It's all going to be medical, except when it's not medical. It'll be rezoned commercial, and it could be, if a doctor doesn't come in and open up an office, or a physical therapist, it could be a McDonald's, because all of a sudden it's commercial. So I would support the town writing the planning commission with some of our questions and some of our concerns. Once again, here's a developer coming in, and there's no, it's been 40 years. There's no recommendation that they do anything about the roads or left turn lanes. It's just like, oh, we're going to plop down all these buildings. So those are my questions. And I would hope that maybe the town would think of writing and kind of weighing in on this, our concerns, especially with that whole sewer thing.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman Finke. And first off, I do not know whether they are obliged to obtain a certificate of need. I don't know the ins and outs of when that is required. Certainly, as you pointed out, the facility that MUSC is proposing and is moving forward with was approved. Their certificate of need was approved. So they sought and obtained a certificate of need for that facility. And I know that it included, I think it was MRI. I don't know if they had CAT scan as well in there. And there would have been, I think, urgent care facilities included. So whether any of those are a trigger for when you have to have a certificate of need or not, I do not know. So yes, I do not know the answer to that first question. I would be surprised if there is any ordinance that would in fact require the utility to provide sewage service to any location within Charleston County. So far as I know, the utility has the ability to control where it provides service. And of course, as you are already aware, we have looked into, I'll say, proposals for developments where the ability to obtain sewage service from our utility was a question of interest. And in every instance that I'm familiar with, the utility went back to consider what their capacity limitations were and whether there were other hurdles to them to provide the service. So I just have to believe that the developers for this village are misreading what's required under an ordinance.
It was 2078 was the one they cited.
Yeah, well, I suspect they're in error, but again, I don't know that.
Right.
There's actually a provision in our code of ordinances on chapter 30, which deals with the utility commission. It's section 30-55C, and it says, it's kind of like talking about the powers and duties of the commission, which in most instances will operate independent and without any influence by the town. But under paragraph C, the ordinance says, the town council must approve by ordinance any plan by the commission to service new customers outside of the town limits or outside of those areas with contractual obligations with Heater of Seabrook, Inc. at the time the town took possession of the system. The commission would have to document the economic and other advantages for serving those customers and the capital charges, if any, for serving those customers. Council shall be required to hold a public hearing on any such request received from the commission. After adoption of an ordinance by the council, the question of providing water and/or sewer services to new customers must be submitted to voters of the town for approval.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Joe. At least, Jerry, it looks like town council would stand in the way of the developer's interpretation that this 2078 would somehow compel that service be provided by our utility.
Yeah,
So-
I think they were citing the fact that the sewer line already runs in front of the property because it goes to Kiowa River Estates. And so then they were citing this ordinance about unincorporated areas of the county. But like I said, when I read it, it's just, we can't condition annexation on that service, not that we have to provide the service. So, but they just were presenting it kind of as fact, and it was, I thought, very bothersome that that was what they were putting out there.
And as far as your recommendation that we submit a comment, I have no objection. I have not ginned up a comment. I don't recall that I shared it, but the Johns Island Task Force did submit a comment on November the 4th. And of course, their comment was in opposition to the
And
proposed development.
John was there and testified or made a presentation, so.
John Kenny?
Yeah, yeah. Who chairs the task force right now? Is
Oh, John Zlogar, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, yeah. Okay, is that any further question, Jerry?
No, that's it.
I didn't know if I'd actually responded to all of your questions. That's why I asked.
Well, the whole thing about the rezoning, I think the town could raise questions about the rezoning, that there should be, if they're rezoning it for a medical village and there's really, the county puts restrictions on it, that's great. But as somebody testified yesterday, well, once they get it rezoned commercial, then it's very easy for them to come back and say, oh, we didn't fill these buildings with doctors and physical therapists. We want to fill it with XYZ, which was not ever the purpose. So I just think there's kind of a sheep in wolf's clothing there, and we just might want to weigh in on some of this.
All right. Well, it's certainly, I'll have to go back to see how they characterize the obligation to provide sewage service, but I think it's important that we bring to the attention of the Planning Commission that there's a town ordinance that might be in the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It would do no harm. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions concerning this proposed development? Hearing none. I have exhausted my entire list of items. So now we will proceed on the agenda, and lo and behold, the first of our council members to have an opportunity to address council will be Councilwoman Finke.
And my fellow council members will be happy to know I have nothing else on my list today. So I will pass on to Pat.
Very good, thank you. And Pat?
Okay, unfortunately, I have quite a few things on my list if I can find it. Just a quick communications report like I usually do. The Seabroker came out with Mayor Gregg's article on zoning administrator and chief code enforcement officer. And then Tidelines had 12 items that we were either mentioned in or focused on, including this meeting, TOS Eclipse, and 7 candidate profiles before the election. So I think we kind of overwhelmed them with all the information for the town for this particular last 2 weeks. I pretty much talked about the Sapoa long-range planning, but let me just go over that again. We met today, and they've been doing a benchmark report on 5 similar communities to Seabrook, and it's a very interesting report. It's 40 some odd pages, but It's interesting to compare ourselves with other communities like ours. I already addressed the short-term renters. We spent quite a bit of time discussing a vision statement. And Mayor Gregg, you may remember this. I'm not sure if you go back to 2008 here in the town, but there was supposedly a joint vision statement between SAPOA, the club, and the town. And I said I would bring this up because there was a question whether or not the town would have been involved in a joint vision statement. Do you have any recollection on that?
Not per se. There was, you're referring to 2008, and the challenge for me is that I was not a member of council until 2013, but there was an undertaking to have all three organizations cooperate, I'll call it, in the marketing of the community. So there was a time when the town had a budget item that they funded to do advertising, and we spent money with obviously marketing in that connection. And the club and the POA, I think, had teamed up to use the same marketing firm, different from what the town was using, but they were using the same marketing firm for some of their promotions. And I'm fairly confident that sometime after 2008, the club and the POA went their separate ways as far as who they would rely on to do whatever they had in mind to do in the way of marketing. And of course, as you well know, the town has abandoned its marketing efforts. So we're not doing what anybody would traditionally characterize as marketing for the community. We have a line item in the budget, and of course, there is no money in that associated with that line item.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess it'll come up again. I'm sure that someone will approach us with a vision statement and ask what our thoughts on it. I think at this point it was going to be passed along. So I didn't know whether you had any recollection of that. My next is a series of questions because I want to get some publicity out for our upcoming events. And the first one is going to be the holiday Christmas drive-through on December 9th. My first question for council would be, is it a holiday or is it a Christmas drive-through? What term do we use for this particular event?
I would say holiday.
Okay. Did we decide on a time? I have some notes. I thought it was 5 to 8, but I wasn't sure if we changed it to 6. Do we have a time for the drive-in?
If I can just chime in for 1 second. Historically, we have called it the Christmas party. Last year, we rebranded it as the drive-through Christmas party. I mean, we can certainly call it whatever you want. I did just want to let you know that was the phrase that we had used in the past. Last year we did 5 to 8, which may have been a little bit too long. It kind of tailed off after 7:30 or so. So we may want to consider doing 5 or 5:30 to 7 or 7:30, just based on what we learned from last year.
I think if we cut the hours down, that's not a bad idea because that last 45 minutes was pretty dead last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think 5:30 to 7:30 might be good.
At 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not like that's the only time people can drive through. That's just when we're there doing candy canes and cupcakes. So yeah, I'd like 5:30 to 7:30.
Jerry, back to the Christmas or the holiday. How do you feel about it looking at this announcement that Joe's put together for last year. Do you think we should have a holiday party or Christmas?
I'm just always very sensitive to that, and I like saying holiday party. But that's, just because we've always called it the Christmas party, I think we should kind of recognize who lives in our community and call it a holiday party.
Yeah. I'm assuming we're all going to be there and staff will be there to greet attendees. Will there be music, Joe? Are we going to have music again?
We won't have any form of live music, but we do have some speakers that we put out there, and we'll stream some holiday music.
And we're still going to have sweet treats, is that correct?
That's the plan.
Okay, will they be prepackaged and handled safely? If that was part of what we wrote last year.
Yeah, the intent is to basically have a continuation of what we had last year, with some additional enhancements based on the budgetary change at our last council meeting.
Okay, and last year we told residents that they were going to remain in their cars at all times and wear a mask anytime they had face-to-face interaction with others. Should I include that in the statement, in my publicity or my things I'm going to put out there?
I would recommend that it stay a drive-through party. I mean, you could probably say masks are recommended, but I mean, we will be outdoors. So like we just had the shred day a couple weeks ago, and I mean, we didn't require masks or anything when people came to that because it was an outdoor event and activity. So I think you can put they're recommended or optional, but I don't know that there's a need to require it.
Okay, so residents, I can say residents will be asked to remain in their cars at all times, basically. Okay. Joe, I saw that logo that you just put up there. If you would send that to me, I just loved that Christmas logo. It's really great.
Well, that one said Merry Christmas. If we're going to call it the holiday party, we'll have to change it.
Yeah. No, I just meant the our seal. Our bird with the Christmas hat and the circles.
Yeah. Well, you probably can't see that. Hang on one second.
And we can probably talk about that.
The seal did have Merry Christmas on it last year.
Okay. Happy holidays. Then we go to Toys to Tots, and I combine these two things, but on timelines, I'd like to separate them because I know there were people who didn't realize you could drop off their Toys for Tots at Town Hall. They kept seeing the Christmas party and they weren't aware of the fact that they could drop them off separately. So I'd like to do a separate post about Toys for Tots and donations being dropped off, not only at the holiday party, but also anytime. When do you think the boxes will go out and when will you be picking the boxes up? Joe.
We had asked for them to deliver them, but we're so far out, they've contacted us and said they probably won't be able to get all the way out here. So we're trying to make arrangements either to meet them somewhere or to go to their location. I expect we'll probably have them either early next week or the week after.
Okay.
And then we do keep them out for several weeks here at Town Hall. I mean, for anyone who wants to come in at any point during the season to drop off an unwrapped toy, they can certainly do that. And then we collect the majority of them during our holiday event.
Right.
But they can drop them off at any time.
Okay. If you would just let me know when the boxes get there, that would be great. Do you know when you'll be taking them away from Town Hall? Will that be on the 10th or?
They have a due date. I don't remember what it is offhand, but it would probably be the Friday morning. So if the party, I think last year was on the 10th. This year, I think we're See if I have it on here.
We're doing the drive-through on the 9th.
On the 9th. So we would probably bring them in on the 10th.
Okay. And then the other possible event that's coming up is the swearing-in ceremony. It's supposed to be the first Tuesday in January, which would be January 4th. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Do you know if it will be open? Do we have any idea yet what we're doing?
At this point, we haven't finalized any arrangements yet. I think we're going to do it at noon, probably similar to what we did last time. We haven't talked about the logistics of it. I would like to have council and their immediate families, the council members and their immediate families, if they feel comfortable being present. It is a oath of office, so I'm not trying to get into like legal questions on something like an oath of office, but I believe that you have to be present in the presence of, and we believe the judge is going to be the one doing it again this time, but I believe you have to be here to take the oath. So I feel like we could have council and the mayor and council and their immediate families present, and then we would live stream it. I would probably recommend not opening it up broadly at this point in time, unless you wanted to maybe do it in a location outside. That's probably the only way I would feel comfortable if we had a bunch of people coming in, is if we did it at a open air location.
Okay, but I could say that it would be happening on the first Tuesday in January. Then more details will be put out. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's what I put in the election results
Yeah, I
notice.
think that's what you
That it'll be
didn't.
in early January, but yeah, it'll be the 4th. We'll probably do it at 12 p.m. and more details will be forthcoming.
Okay. Thank you for filling me in on that.
Mhm.
And with that, thank you very much, everybody, and I'm done.
Well, thank you, Pat. Next up, Barry.
Had nothing today.
Barry, that was short. I didn't get to make a note yet. Hold on.
I yielded my time to Pat.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Next on the agenda, we have the items from the town administrator. Joe, you have action items first. Please proceed.
Here, let me bring those up here. Give me 1 second. So we have the first one will be a second reading item. That's ordinance 2021-14. That's revising our committee structure of the town. So the changes will be on the discretionary or advisory committees. Just to recap, we would be doing away with Ways and Means Committee, and council would instead have a council work session or workshop if you elected to continue meeting 2 times per month. The Governmental Relations Committee would be eliminated. The Community Relations Committee would be eliminated. The Communications, Planning and Development Committee would be eliminated. In their place, we would have the Community Promotions and Engagement Committee, the Environment and Wildlife Committee. We would retain the Public Safety Committee and then create the Public Works Committee. And as we discussed last time, for each of those committees, the language we've included in the ordinance is essentially adopting a standard layout for each of those committees. So, that it's actually established who it is, how many members, how they're appointed, what the duties and responsibilities of each of those committees are. So really just trying to reorganize and standardize our committee structure. And we did put in the ordinance that that it would be effective from and after the date of adoption. I think we had talked about doing January 1. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Okay. So for second reading, we will change that to January 1st effective date. But now that we have the election results certified, I trust the mayor's already putting plans together for who will be assigned to and chair each of those committees. And our hope is that no later than the January meeting, we would have everyone appointed to each of the appropriate committees. So just procedurally, I would say the mayor should be corresponding with council members just to determine who will be assigned to each committee. And then we basically have it set up where the council member who will act as chair will essentially nominate other members who will fill out their respective committee. So we have each one set up with 5 members, one of whom is appointed by the mayor, serves as chair. The remaining 4 are nominated by the chair and will be appointed by the full vote of town council. So a little bit of homework over the next few weeks, mayor assigning the chair of each committee. And then kind of once you have that set, each committee seeking out who they would like to nominate to serve on their particular committee. We do have it if a council member, even though they're not a chair of one committee, if they do want to serve on an additional committee, they can do that. We have it with up to 2 council members can serve on the committee. So there may be a little bit of back and forth if individuals want to serve on an additional committee above and beyond the one that they would be assigned to as chair. But ultimately, each one will have at least 1 council member, and then either 3 if there's 2 council members, or 4 if there's only 1 council member on the committee, so that each one would be at 5 members. So I would definitely start getting the gears in motion for that one so that we are able to hit the ground running at our January meeting.
Joe, I sent you some information on this. Do you think that we can get this information out on the website? Hopefully after this passes in the December meeting. This would be the second.
Yeah, we'll try to get it ready. So all we have to do is just flip the switch after second reading is done. Because I will be leaving the country the day after the meeting next week. So we'll want to make sure we have it ready to go so we can just activate it once second reading is approved. Assuming there's no major changes at second reading. If there's major changes, we'll have to go back and regroup. But assuming this version of the ordinance is what gets adopted, we can pretty much have it ready to go for after the meeting on Tuesday of next week.
And we could certainly get the volunteer form out there, the revised volunteer form, because I would like to invite people to fill out the volunteer form if they're interested in possibly serving on one of these committees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, what I intend we'll do is as we receive applications, we can actually set up a shared folder in SharePoint that everyone will have access to. So we'll create a folder for each of the committees, and then as applications come in, we can drop them in that particular committee folder. And then if somebody is interested in marks that they're interested in serving on more than one, then they may appear in more than one folder. But anyone who expresses interest in a committee, we can move their volunteer application into a shared folder that everyone would have access to.
That'd be great.
Any other questions, comments, or changes on the committee ordinance? All right, hearing none. I'm just making a note so I remember to get that on the website. The next item that we have will be, I have too many files open now. Give me 1 second. Ordinance 2021-15. This one has been all kinds of fun. This is the business license ordinance. And I thought we had covered most of what we needed to cover at the work sessions that we had over the last few weeks. But in going through the MASC's ordinance, there were a couple head scratchers, to put it lightly. One of them was actually they have a model ordinance that they being the municipal association. And it's just kind of a generic ordinance. So it's an enabling ordinance that's adopting the attached business license ordinance. So the business license ordinance is by and large just a standard model ordinance with a few changes here and there. And I'll go through some of the changes that I've recommended for ours. But as I was looking at the enabling ordinance, most of the whereas, that's all pretty straightforward. But I had to contact the municipal association when I was looking at the actual part of the MASC's ordinance, the actual ordaining part, because paragraph 1 says that the attached ordinance is hereby adopted and shall become effective beginning with the business license period commencing on May 1. So under the new statewide mandated ordinance, every city and county that has a business license will have to go to a May 1 through April 30th business license year. Right now we're on January through December. So what we'll do in our ordinance is we're basically extending our 2021 business license year through to April 30th. So in paragraph 1, it says the new ordinance will go into effect May 1st. The second paragraph that says all prior ordinances of the town related to business licensing, which are in effect at the time of the enactment of this ordinance, are hereby repealed and replaced in their entirety with the new ordinance. So for those of you following along, what this model enacting ordinance says, we're adopting a new ordinance which takes effect, doesn't take effect until May 1st, but we're getting rid of our current ordinance when we grant second reading approval to this enabling ordinance. So my question was, what happens if a business comes in between second reading of this ordinance and April 30th? Because we're still in our 2021/22 extended 16-month licensing period. And it was referred to one of the staff attorneys at the municipal association. Unfortunately, I haven't heard back yet. So I have language in the draft ordinance that we'll look at next week for first reading. But just a heads up, if we do hear back prior to then, there may have to be some tweaks. I don't know how this kind of got through, because it creates a time period where one ordinance is repealed, but the new one isn't in effect yet. And I don't think that's the intent of what we were trying to do. So looking at what I've drafted in our current draft, I did add a section because the state statute requires that our 2022-23 license year has to be revenue neutral. So I did add a whereas to the model enabling ordinance to say that we had run the calculations and found them to be revenue neutral. What I've recommended at this point is that we say in our ordinance that the 2022 business license ordinance, which will be attached and adopted as if it was fully incorporated in this ordinance, is adopted and shall become effective on January 1 of 2022. So what that means is basically this ordinance goes into effect, our current ordinance goes away. It gets a little bit funky because then for part of the year, the first 12 months of 2021, we'll be licensing businesses based on SIC. And then for the first 4 months of 2022, we'll be licensing them based on the NAICS classification system. Not the end of the world, not that big of a deal, but it would create a little bit of an anomaly. And then, of course, in here, we would keep that our existing business license, we would delete and replace all existing sections with the new ordinance. I think I meant to put that as January 1. I'll have to correct that for first reading version. So basically what we have in the ordinance itself is by and large the standard MASC ordinance. There are a couple instances where I've recommended that we modify from what MASC has put out as the standard ordinance. And I'm just trying to pull that up here so I can highlight those and bring them to your attention as to what they are. So this is basically just a compare version where we're comparing our ordinance with the MASC model ordinance. You see, by and large, we're taking the MASC model ordinance. Down here, they highlight for those jurisdictions who have a license year that doesn't expire on April 30th, we either have to extend our current year or have some sort of interim period. And ours, we just filled it in that the license year ending on April 30th of next year shall have commenced on January 1st of last year and runs for a 16-month period. So we're basically just extending our 2021 license period through the end of April. Couple other just minor little things. They called it section 4. Well, because we're going to be putting ours in chapter 8, you'll see I put in section 8.12 because in here it's going to be called 8.12. So just to make sure when it's getting loaded into our code book that the sections will correspond. But you'll see very, very few changes. When we get down to the display and transfer requirement, there is a requirement in the model that all businesses have to display their license in a conspicuous place at the business establishment. And if it's a transient or non-resident, they have to carry the license upon their person or in a vehicle readily available for inspection. For years, the town has actually used a business license decal. And basically, we kind of use that in lieu of actually having the license in the vehicle, because it's not uncommon for a contractor to have, 10, 20 or more vehicles. And they're probably not all going to have a copy of the town business license in each vehicle. So what we've done is we've allowed contractors to purchase, they get one with a license. If they need more than one, they purchase a decal. And what that does is they just put it on the vehicle itself. It's used only for identification purposes and just identifying that business actually has a license from the town. So I did check with MASC. They said they didn't see any issue with us putting that language back in the model ordinance. So we did include that. Changed a little bit of formatting here. capitalized rate schedules and whatnot. So kind of the meat of the ordinance is the new rate structures. And those are the things that we've talked about, I would say ad nauseum for the last few weeks, the rate. So what we have in the ordinance is the rate structure that we seem to have agreement on, which I believe we called 4B. It was taking us to kind of the regional average for all the rates and reducing the average by 10%. You'll see some additional classes in the rate schedule. Those are actually required Class 8. A lot of them are actually either administered by the municipal association or there's some state statute that applies to the license. So like 8.2, I believe, is for rail transportation. There's a state provision for that. MASC handles telecom, both wired and wireless communications. They handle the insurance. 8.5152 deals with coin operated machines. 8.6 deals with billiard, pool rooms and billiard tables where the per table fee is set by state statute. And then we have the ability to carve out and create special provisions for other classes that the council finds basically has a disproportionately small or a disproportionately large impact on service demands. What we've recommended, we've already talked about the kind of the temporary vendor licenses for artists, craftspersons, performing arts and whatnot. We've recommended pulling those out, creating a class 9.1 for those, which would have just a flat base rate of $20. And that would cover an event up to 3 days. If you want to have a different amount, I mean, there's so few and they're so nominal, it doesn't really matter to me what they are. I just threw that in because right now they're 25 and a lot of our in-town rates are going down in the 15 to 20% range. So I recommended putting them in at 20. If you want them to be 10, whatever, that's fine. And then 9.2, this was the one that really jumped out as we were looking at the numbers. So when we talked about the class schedule, that's one thing. So all the classes by and large for in-town businesses are going down somewhere between 10 to 20%, probably average around 15%. Of the 600 or so businesses that we have inside our town limits, over 500 of them are short-term rental properties. Under the NAICS classification system, those businesses will transition from a class 7 to a class 3. So right now we're charging those ones $80 base, and I think it's $350 for the variable. On class 3, that's going to go to $45 for a base and $1.85. So on average, we had 500 plus of our 600 in-town businesses. The rate was going to go down about, I think the average was about 47%. And to me, when I was looking at it, the demand that we're seeing from the enforcement side, not only enforcing the ordinances and whatnot, but we're picking up a good sized chunk of beach patrol, for example, which is tied to tourists coming in, and they're all staying at these particular units. My recommendation was to pull them out of class 3 and create a new classification, which we would call 9.2. But essentially, we would keep the rate structure for 9.2 the same as it was for class 7. So on average, instead of a 47% reduction, they're going to get about a 15 to 17% reduction, which is more in line with pretty much all the other businesses in town, because they were the only one that had a really significant rate class change. It would result in a really big reduction. And we know that, and I would say they have a higher impact from a service level than, other types of businesses in the town. So my recommendation would be that we take short-term rental properties and create a special class 9.2 and use the same base and variable structure that we have for class 7, which is what they have been categorized in the past up until this new ordinance goes into effect. What that allows us to do, we still have to be revenue neutral in year 1. So because we would be generating a little bit more off of short-term rentals, and when I say we're generating more, that's not an increase on what they're paying today. They still be paying less than what they're paying today. But it would result in more coming in from short-term rental properties, which in turn allows us for the first 2 years to increase the discount rate. We had talked originally about 20%. The discount rate would go to 23.5% next year, and then 11.75% the year after that. So they're still going to see a discount, just not as much of a discount, and to me is more in line with the service demand for that particular class of business. So this is what the rate structure will be at full implementation of the ordinance, which we've talked about would be in our 2024 license year. What we need to do, because year 1 we have to be revenue neutral, we would have well, actually, I'll take a step back. If this ordinance goes into effect January 1, we would have a transitional rate, basically keeping the same rates that we have in effect currently for 2021 calendar year. We would just extend those rates into April. So not changing any rates until the new license year goes into effect May 1. May 1, they have to be revenue neutral. So that would be the first, or I guess the second transitional rate schedule, which would be the 23.5% discount. And then we'd be phasing it in over 3 years. So for the period running 2023 through 24, we would still have a discounted rate, but not as discounted. So basically we would have 3 transitional schedules. So Appendix A1, this is basically just a continuation of what we have on the books today. Now, granted, some classes may change, so it's possible we may have had one business that came in and was a 5 if they did it in April of last year, but if they come in April of next year, the NAICS might indicate they're a 3. There's really not a way around that. So we just have to roll with it if anything comes in during that 4-month period. And then we would not implement the non-resident rates because we don't have them on the books currently. The next transitional year would be kind of when we fully implement the new license. And that's just taking the rate schedule, discounting everything by 23.5%, almost across the board. I didn't adjust the state ones because those are set by state statute. So we took every one from Appendix A, and then we reduced it by 23.5%. For the base, we rounded it to the nearest dollar. For the variable, we rounded it to the nearest 5 cents, just so we didn't have like random numbers all over the place. So on average, it's a reduction of about 20, or a discount rate of about 23.5%. So this would be the rates for the license year starting in May of next year, which is the first full year of implementation. We would do the non-resident rates, which would be one rate for in-town businesses, a separate rate for out-of-town. The rates would be doubled for non-resident businesses. We did not include the declining rate structure, so that has been struck from the model ordinance. Appendix A3, this is basically just the next year of the transition. At this point, we're still discounting the rates, but instead of the full reduction of 23.5%, we're discounting them 11.75%. So that would be for the 2023-24 license year. Again, still have the non-resident inside-outside rates. Once we get beyond that, so the 24, 25, that's when we go back to, what the actual fee schedule will be in Appendix A. So that's the non-discounted rate. So the way it's laid out, you see the full implementation on Appendix A, and then you'll see 3 transitional periods where we're essentially phasing and transitioning away from our current towards the new one. The last 2 are just some additional information about the Class 8 rates. These are in the MASC model ordinance. We really were just putting in our rate schedules and then also stating that the transitional rates would apply over the remainder of this year and the following 2 years. And then we had that for all the Class 1 businesses, and then Class 8 businesses. And then Class 9 is where we put in language for the 9.1. So if they are a NAICS Class 711510, which is independent artists, writers, and performers, we would have special provisions. And they would say basically generally, independent artists, craftspersons, writers, and performers are subject to a license tax based on their natural class. So whatever their natural class is, if it's something they're doing, continuously throughout the year, they're not going to be part of this subcategory. They would go based on whatever their regular rate class would be. But then we carve out independent artists, craftspersons, writers, and performers who wish to sell goods and or perform services at a public event or activity within the town. Examples would include art shows, craft shows, fairs, festivals, and similar activities. With a total duration not to exceed 3 consecutive days, may obtain a temporary vendor license from the town. Temporary vendor license would be valid only upon the premises of the event or activity and would expire immediately upon conclusion of the event and activity. And then we have the rate here, which is basically just a flat $20. So it's not a full annual license. If they want a full annual license, we would find whatever class that is, and they would pay the regular base rate and variable rate for that class. But if they're doing it only for, just a temporary event or period, not to exceed 3 days, then we would have a carve out for that provision. And then the other one, as I mentioned, 9.2 would become the short-term rentals. So the class is 721199. It's called all other traveler accommodations. And we say the business license tax for establishments primarily engaged in providing short-term lodging, including specifically short-term rental units and vacation club units, but excluding hotels, motels, B&Bs, which are a different class entirely, that would be computed as follows. And the rates that we have in there are the same as Class 7, which is what they're considered right now. And then we just added a business license would not be issued for a rental or vacation club unit until the property owner or designated agent has applied for and obtained a short-term rental permit as required by the DSO. So that's a condition for getting a Class 9.2 license. The last thing is Appendix B, and that's just information that will come out periodically from the state. And it's looking at all the independent or individual NAICS sector and subsector classes. So when we determine what class a business will be classified as for calculating their rates, we would go to the NAICS handbook, find out what the class code for that particular business is, and then this is the schedule we would use. So one of the biggest ones is construction, basically anything with a Class 23. That covers all contractors. So if their first 2 letters start with 2-3, it's a construction, and they get assigned to Class 8.1. So this is basically what our staff would be using for classification purposes as businesses come in to either apply for a new license or applying for a renewal in future years. And these classes are going to be different in a lot of instances than what they were in SIC, which is what we used under the old ordinance. But by law, this is what we would have to use going forward. So that's a lot of information I've thrown at you in a few minutes. I would be happy to go through if anyone has questions about any of these. If you want to know kind of why we recommended certain things, I'd be happy to go into more information for that if you feel that's needed. But again, really the most important thing in here is most of this language is mandatory now. So we really can't significantly change it. You might be able to do a little tweak here and there. But the stuff that we have the most discretion over is the rate schedule and the policy considerations like the inside outside rate. If we want to have any additional class 9 businesses, we can look at doing those as well. But this, as of right now, is the ordinance we are planning to put before you next week for first reading. Like I said, when I first started, if we get anything back from MASC about this transitional period, we may have to go in and reevaluate that a little bit. But absent any major changes, this is the ordinance we intend to have on the agenda next week. So with that, be happy to answer any questions or open the floor for comment.
So going back to what we were discussing earlier about artists or craftsmen, looking at Appendix B, which is, I don't know, yeah, Appendix B. Where would they fit in? Would they fit in under arts, entertainment, and recreation, or are they considered retail trade?
Well, they would be considered independent artists, writers, and performers. So for that particular one, because we've carved them out as a subclass, 711, because they've been carved out as a subclass, they're, pulled out with their entire one. If they weren't doing just a, 3-day event or something like that, then they would just default to 7.1, which is art, entertainment, and recreation.
Okay.
Those are all going to start with 7.1, but there's literally hundreds of businesses that'll start with 7.1. This is basically saying, except for those ones that we've carved out, all other ones that start with 7.1 would be classified as a class 3 for rate purposes.
So as a class 3, they would be paying $45 for a license. Is that correct?
As a class 3, it'll depend on the year. So at
Yeah.
full implementation, a class 3 in town would be a base of $45
Okay.
and a variable of $185.
Okay.
Whereas opposed to right now, a class 3 is $55 to $225.
Okay.
So you're seeing a reduction from 55 to 45 and from 225 to 185. Now, for the first 2 full years of the ordinance, it's going to be even more of a reduction because we have the discount rates to make the ordinance revenue neutral.
Okay. I was just curious as to where they fell, and that's where I thought they fell. And we were throwing around the number of 65, and it's really a lot less than that. Okay, thank you.
Well, that's for what would classify as that particular class.
Mhm.
I know the email that came in was for a photographer, and that was actually a different class. I believe you're a class 5. So
Okay.
under our current ordinance, a class 5 for a photographer is 65 and 3. Under the new ordinance for an in-town, that goes to 60 and 225.
Okay.
Now, whether a photographer changes classes without going in and looking at the class schedule, I don't know that right offhand. I believe that's one that would stay the same class, but I couldn't tell you that without looking at it for sure.
You gave me enough information. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Joe? Gee, hearing none. Joe, go ahead.
The only other thing I would add is we have already had a meeting. It was myself, Linda, and Nicole, because we are going to have to update our licensing software program to add additional classes and change all the rates and everything. So we've already gotten the ball rolling on that. And we have indicated we really need to have that up and ready by the end of December. So when we switch over January 1, we would have the rates themselves aren't changing until May, but we need to have the new classes loaded in to get us through that, the first transitional period from January through April. All right, if there's nothing else on that one, I think we've talked it to death. The next ordinance we have is the budget ordinance. We had already gone through and talked about that in great extent as well. Hang on one second. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm pulling up the right ordinance here. So this is ordinance 2021-16. It's an ordinance adopting a budget for the fiscal year beginning January 1 of next year and ending December 31st of next year. It is a balanced budget based on our anticipated use of some fund balance. The total expenditures as it stands currently, $2,445,572. We would have each of our funds, the general fund, state A tax, county A tax, alcohol fund, and the new one, which we're calling the ARPA fund. That's the American Recovery Plan Act. That's the money that's come in from the federal government. And then we would continue our designated funds of emergency, road and drainage, town facilities, and vehicle replacement. All the other language in there is pretty much standard from year to year, so I won't go through that unless anyone has any questions, but I will kind of hit a few of the highlights. The biggest one being that we have added the ARPA fund for the federal dollars. We have already received about 464,240. That was our first distribution. So right now, I think Catherine has just put that in our grants fund, but we do anticipate, I would like to have a resolution at next week's meeting, basically to have council designate those funds and put them in a new restricted fund, because those dollars are going to be restricted by federal requirements. So we'll have our first payment will be in the bank. I don't expect us to spend any of that before December 31st. And then we've budgeted the second half, which is 464,239 and change, coming in next year. We have a couple years to spend the dollars. I know there's going to be a committee that's working on some funding recommendations for that. So just for the sake of budgeting something, I've assumed that we would spend half of the funds this year or this upcoming year. We may spend more, we may spend less, but just for the sake of having something in there, I assumed that we would spend the dollars that we received from the first distribution at some point during calendar year 2022. So that obviously has increased the bottom line of the budget pretty substantially by adding that additional money into the budget. The only other ones I was going to highlight, there are some that were in your packet where you see the budget number is highlighted in yellow. And that's just indicating that the value for that particular item has changed from the first draft that we looked at and had all of our workshops to discuss. So we've also included the specific items within each line item just to highlight the ones that have changed as well. So for example, you'll see the personnel costs pretty much went up across the board. That was based on the recommendation to mirror what Social Security has done with cost of living across the board. And then we also included the staffing cost for in-house building and grounds. Those are included in these numbers. Our capital expenditures are up significantly. And again, that's tied to an increase primarily for equipment to staff buildings and grounds. We've increased community promotions from 5,000 to 7,500. We've increased a little bit on IT. And we decreased the landscaping budget because we would do that in-house as opposed to contractor. We increased equipment rentals, furniture and equipment. We increased workers' comp, maintenance for vehicles and equipment, primarily for the additional equipment, which would have to be maintained. We've added a new line item for materials and supplies for building and ground. That's everything from seed to fertilizer to flowers to you name it, everything we would need to supply the crew. Increase the office budget, 1,800 for pre-employment. That would include hiring one full-time as well as several part-time support staff. Professional services, other. Primarily the big change there was we added GIS services through a third-party contract. We've bumped up telecom, travel and training, and uniforms, all mostly just to correspond to additional personnel. So we still at this point are showing a surplus of revenue of a little over 1.5 in our general fund, and expenditures 1.466. So we're showing a surplus still of just a hair under $40,000. We have our transfers from our general fund balance to each of our our designated funds. So you'll see we would expect to still finish next year, I would say very conservatively, at 1.3 million. Will likely be probably somewhere closer 1.6 million, but definitely at least one full year's worth of expenditures that would be in our rainy day general fund balance. A couple items we talked about at our last workshop, just as a follow-up. We have done some additional due diligence on the topic of if we're buying new equipment, mowers, trimmers, all that, the cost of that, I mean, it's enough to make a little bit of a dent. You're probably looking at at least a 30% premium for that particular type of equipment. One thing, and I did meet with a contractor to talk about what we would need to do to basically power and charge all of that equipment. Because we've talked about doing a storage building at the rear of town hall. We basically can do it, but we would have to upgrade all of our electrical in order to accommodate everything that we would basically have to plug in every night, from mowers to hand trimmers and all that. We can do that. I would probably want to go in and increase the capital budget a bit, because that's going to come in, I think, quite a bit higher than what we had anticipated if we were just running in maybe a couple outlets and a light or something in there. Like I said, we are still showing a surplus, so there are dollars available if that's a priority of council, but I don't think we'll be able to do that for what we had anticipated for our storage cost. I think the building itself and having a concrete foundation, and then some assembly costs. We're probably pretty close budget-wise for that. But if we're going to have to upgrade all the electrical and everything, that's certainly going to add a lot more expense. In addition, above and beyond the higher cost of that equipment. So if you want me to proceed with that, we certainly can increase the cost for those items. But before I did that, I wanted to just put that back before council for discussion.
So Joe, what you're saying that it's an increased cost, but you didn't say what the magnitude of the increase would be to provide adequate electrical supply to the shed.
Yeah, I am waiting to get a better indication from the contractor. We've actually identified like an engineered building that I think would be attractive, would look nice. So we have an estimate for that. I mean, it would have to be erected, painted, roofing shingles on it. But if we use the same company that's painting and re-roofing town hall, I mean, that's pretty easy because we'll already have the supplies and the materials. So we have a pretty good indication of that, but he was going to come back and try to get a better idea of the electrical demand. We will probably have to increase to be able to handle the load, but at this point, I can't put a firm dollar figure on what that number will be until I hear back from him.
Okay, well, my recollection is that we ran electrical out past the out towards the flagpole last year.
Yeah.
Do you happen to recall what we spent for that?
It was about $6,000 to $7,000.
So this would be at least in that ballpark.
Well, those I think they were run off our existing panel. So it was basically the trenching and the installation, but everything tied into our existing panel. We are under the assumption that this equipment is going to have a higher demand for electricity, and we'll probably have to fully upgrade in order to accommodate that. So I would probably want to increase it. I would say at least $10,000 and perhaps a little bit more, which I think that would cover it. But, if he comes in and says it's even more than that, then, we may have to go back and revisit it again. But I didn't want to put that in until we had a chance to talk about it to see if that was something the council wanted to proceed with.
Well, it seems to me that cost is an important consideration when we're looking at going to electrically powered equipment, that this cost is an important consideration.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to redo the service, as they say, for this building, that's going to be an expensive proposition.
Most likely. Now, what all that would entail if we're trying to pull from this one or just setting up a separate service, which, that's something I'm not an electrician, so I wouldn't even speculate which would be the best approach. But I have asked them to look at it and give me some sort of estimate of what it would take to power that structure to meet what we expect the demand would be on the electric side.
Okay. Any other questions for Joe?
I have some questions. Joe,
Yes.
When you were exploring this, I'm assuming this is professional grade equipment?
Commercial grade, yeah.
Yeah, commercial. Because I have all electric blowers, electric trimmers. And I have to say that I only have a half an acre here and I'm running out of batteries halfway through my job and switching out batteries. So does this actually make, how does this, the professional, the person that we would be hiring, shouldn't they be weighing in on what we buy and don't buy? Because are we just talking about, is this a mower also, or what are we talking about? What kind of equipment specifically are we talking about?
Pretty much if they have an electric option, that's what we would use. So you can get, I believe, a 48-inch commercial mower. Now we may have to have multiple battery packs and keep them charged and change them out. But the smaller handheld stuff, that's not really as big of a deal. But if we're looking at like, and I haven't even been able to find a spreader yet. I don't know if they make an electric spreader or sprayer equipment, but I have found a couple different electric commercial grade mowers. The mower, there's definitely going to be a higher premium. There's one, I think it said it mows like 5 acres or something on a single charge or something, but it's I think close to double the cost of what we've plugged in for a regular gas powered commercial mower. If we have a Gator type cart that we would use, that's going to have more of a higher power demand. You could easily probably go several times back and forth, up and down, the right of way without an issue. But a lot of it is going to say is depending on conditions. So if the grass is wet, you're not going to get the same efficiency out of an electric mower that you would. So I know a lot of our right of way tends to stay a little on the wet side. That's something we would have to, especially the last couple of days. That's something we would have to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, I just know the difference, and I'm just thinking on a commercial grade. I don't know. I don't think the benefit. I'm not seeing a real benefit here. Certainly, and I know we want to try to set an example, but it's a lot of money, and I'm not sure what we're getting is going to be as good as what we could buy for less money in order to do the job. And I think that whoever we hire full time should have a say in this. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, and one other option that we had kind of bounced around with is, I'm not worried about the small handheld stuff. That we can accommodate really without issue. Even if we did kind of like a hybrid while we're operating out of a temporary storage structure, if we still had like the heavy equipment was still gas powered, but blowers and weed trimmers and all that, we operated electric. At some point, we expect that we'll build, a full garage/storage building. That could be, just from a financial standpoint, a better time and a better investment to do it where it's going to be there and stay there, as opposed to in a temporary structure that my hope is we'd be out within 2 or 3 years tops. And then, at that point, either when it comes time to replace that equipment, or we could just go ahead and sell it because it would only be a couple of years old, and then maybe move forward and commit to electric at that time. That's an option as well.
I kind of like that idea. Yeah.
Joe, can I ask, if obviously we want to see what the costs come in. I'm very strongly in favor of us going electric where we can and making that investment. But if you have to upgrade the panel for the shed and the line runs off, wherever the panel is at town hall, won't it be easy just to extend that into the eventual garage we want to build? Once that's done and we've upgraded it, it's just a matter of extending it to the garage, right?
Depending on what the demand of the garage is, we don't really know what the demand would be. If we did something here to serve the storage building, it may work fine for that, but it might not be enough for, whatever demand we might have in the garage. At this point, it's probably too early to say for sure.
And my other question is, Can we use any of the ARP money towards this?
The what money?
The ARP money or the recovery money?
I would have to go back and look at the treasury guidance. I don't know offhand. One option that I did look at, it's just we're so late in the year and trying to get somebody out here to do it. We had talked about doing a resolution for council to basically just designate the ARP funds into a separate restricted fund. I was looking, was there money surplus in this year's budget that we could possibly say, well, let's just take that. If we can spend it before the end of the year, we can get a good chunk of that from this year's budget instead of having to look at it next year. Ideally, that would be great because we could have, the storage shed under construction or in or whatever before we even have the staff in place to start the service. But, the lowest hanging fruit, we've budgeted this year, 350,000 from business license through, I believe that's September. We're already at 516,000. So, I mean, right off the bat, there's one line item that's 166,000 over budget. If we don't do anything and spend that this year, it's just going to roll into the fund balance at the end of the year. So, I mean, if you wanted to do some of it, and if council was okay doing a resolution to authorize the expenditure of higher than estimated revenue, that's one option. We could take some of that out of the fund balance and do more next year is another option. So, I mean, it's not an issue of do we have the money? It's, is it the type of investment that we want to make, knowing that probably in a couple of years down the road, we're just going to take that out and do something else.
I mean, I agree with Pat that whoever we hire for building, what are we calling it? Buildings and landscape?
Buildings and grounds, yeah.
Buildings and grounds. Certainly that person is going to understand equipment and what they need and everything. But I'm also guessing they might not be the person that is super environmentally conscious, and we would have to push towards the electric and non-polluting. So I want them to consult, but I really strongly believe in investing in the electric and going forward that way as much as we can.
Okay. Is that a
I think Joe's
consensus or?
I think Joe's suggestion that we start with the smaller items and we pick the thing that's going to drain the most power is a battery for this lawnmower. I mean, I know I have 2 big batteries and I can't even imagine what we're going to need for a commercial grade lawnmower. I just, maybe we can split it a little bit and know that when we build our other building, we'll move into that commercial grade mower. And that in 3 years, there's such a big change in this technology. It'll probably be less expensive and it'll probably do a better job. I know the difference in the lawnmowers that we looked at 3 years or 4 years ago versus the electrical one that I have now. Huge difference. So I'm just thinking that we might want to balance this a little bit, Jerry, and not everything electric at the beginning.
I understand that, and I could see a push that we would maybe go with a gas powered. I'd like to see the Gator be a hybrid or electric, because I don't think it has to plow through wet grass. I mean, I would understand if we had to go with a gas powered professional, commercial mower for a couple years, but everywhere else where we can. And when we look at what the needs are of the shed, of thinking, would it be easy to expand the panel when when that line's run to the garage, so that we're just thinking forward. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying. I think in 2 and 3 years with the whole push from the federal government that there's going to be huge improvements in electric capabilities. So yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I just don't want us to abandon electric completely on the cost.
No, I'm not saying that. I think we ought to look at each item, I think, and make a decision.
Yeah, because Pat is the queen of the electric tree trimmer. Of which we have one now too, and they do work very well.
I mean, as someone who drove an electric vehicle for about 5 years, I mean, I love them. I see the value in them.
Yeah.
On the back end, they're much more efficient because they have lower, from my experience, lower maintenance costs. You don't have fuel costs. You don't have the oil changes all the time. So, I mean, there's certainly benefits. And my hope is, once we have that full garage, as we are looking at, replacing our vehicles, there's certain things that we have to be able to take out on the beach where, electric may not be feasible. But, as we're replacing code enforcement and other stuff, I could certainly see us having like plug-in hybrids and those type things. And, that's why when I was saying, we don't really know what the demand will be in the garage. That's kind of looking, 5-10 years out. I would love to have a fully electric fleet of all of our vehicles and everything if we could. But, we're nowhere near that point today. But as we're designing and talking about what we're going to do with the garage, I think those are worthy objectives to incorporate. The more we can incorporate that type of technology, I mean, yeah, it may cost a little bit more on the front end, but over time, it's probably at the very least breaking even.
So it seems to me, Joe, that if I haven't misunderstood, you were looking at including all the commercial mower and the Gator as electric, and as Pat has said, there are a number of, I'll call them hand tools that you wouldn't expect to have anywhere near the requirements for battery capacity and could be served by a less robust service.
Right.
Which would dramatically, I would think, impact what we don't know as far as the cost to provide service to a shed. The other advantage is I have no feel at all for availability of a hybrid Gator. I think you said you could get an electric Gator. I don't know if you can buy a hybrid Gator, but either way, my expectation would be that would be a large battery, which kind of implicates that it would need a lot of service. When you get down to things like trimmers and blowers, these things, you can say they're commercial, but the batteries aren't much different whether you think it's commercial or a high quality residential. I mean, they're just not that big.
Yeah.
I think we need to get the cost that Joe's waiting for on redoing the panel and what it will take for the shed, and before we make any big final decision here.
Okay, so we'll just hold on this for the present.
Okay.
Going electric, that is.
Barry, did you have any comments?
No, nothing.
Well, if there was nothing else on that one, the only other one I wanted to point out was on the revenue side. You'll see I highlighted 25,000 here under grant funding. That was the receipt of the Municipal Association Hometown Economic Development Grant. So we showed that as grant funding in the general fund. And then we've added, I think it was under capital, 25,000 for the expenditure for the signs. And then the match would come from state A tax. So you would actually see the match, the $5,000 match, which is required under that program, is in the state A tax. We had anticipated that it was probably about a $30,000 project. We submitted for a $25,000 grant. We would have a match, which we said we would put up a minimum of 5,000. So that's what we're showing in state A tax, 5,000 for our match. And then on the general fund, we're showing 25 in, 25 out for the grant funding and for the expenditure for the signage. Other than that, I think that covers most of the changes. We added the symphony concert. That was one that we had talked about last time. The ARPA expenditures. And again, that's really more of a placeholder. No changes on any of the designated funds. I know we had talked briefly about, did council want to maybe take some fund balance out of ATAX and put it towards the road and drainage project, or just sit on that until we're closer to construction? I mean, I feel like I have an obligation to remind any chance we get. We have to spend it within 2 years, so it's not something that we can sit on in perpetuity. So we can probably get by one more year, but definitely the year after that, we're going to have to start spending some of that down.
Well, I guess the question would be, Joe, if you took it from ATAX and you put it in the designated fund, it really doesn't mean it's going to get spent, does it?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to spend the money. So, we could probably spend part of it for the design, engineering, and everything. I mean, to me, I like spending it better on construction. So I'd probably err on the side of, let's let 2022 be the design, permitting, and everything, and then 2023 hopefully be the construction year. And if Catherine's still on the line, as of this afternoon, we still hadn't gotten our third quarter distribution. I'm going to see if she knows if we have received that yet or not.
Hi, Joe. We haven't. I did reach out to the state to see where that funding is. And as of right now, unfortunately, I don't have any numbers or any anticipation of when we're going to get that. I thought I would prior to the meeting. Hopefully I get an answer before next week and I can give a better update.
Yeah, so that'll be a good indication once we get our third quarter, because that's usually our biggest quarter, because it covers July, August, September, I believe. So we're getting like the peak of the peak travel season. But I qualify that with our highest number ever was actually the second quarter this year, which was April, May, June. So I'm interested to see kind of where the numbers are for the third quarter. If they continue to be way up over the previous year, we may actually go back and increase the projections even higher. But until we have those third quarter numbers, I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I think that covers all the main items for the budget stuff. And obviously that's something we'll talk more about next week, especially if I can get the contractor estimates, and we'll go back and revisit that discussion. Other than that, are there any other questions or comments on the draft budget? All right, well, that concludes the discussion of the action items. I did just have a couple update items to hit quickly. You had already introduced Tyler, so we won't do that. But if Catherine is still on, I would like for her to give a brief update on where we stand with something I feel like we've talked about for years, which is taking credit cards at town hall.
Sure. Just want to let everybody know, if you have swung by my desk and noticed that it looks like I've got like 3 computers on my desk, we did get a credit card machine. We've got it through Square. We've done some test runs, and I am currently working with our accountant on the back end to see how to put it towards our different accounts that we're going to be taking credit cards for. And hopefully by the end of this month, we should be able to be processing them. He should be giving me a call, hopefully tomorrow, if not by the end of the week, and get that starting and rolling. And then there'll be a little kiosk at the front counter that will be put up that shows where we can take credit cards. So you can insert, swipe, tap. We can even take it from Apple Pay or Google Pay. So if people have their credit card on their phone, they can tap it there. Eventually down the line, we will have the ability to send out invoices and stuff like that, and taking credit card payments online. But we're kind of doing a little bit of baby steps, and and on the fee breakdown, when the person sees their receipt, it'll show how much their business license is, how much their permit is, and any other services that they're paying for. At the bottom, it'll look like it's a little tax, but it's just a 3% convenience fee that we're passing on to everybody. The one policy thing, though, that we won't do is take credit card payments over the phone. It's just a little bit of a hassle to do, in my opinion, and taking that personal information over the phone, there could be a lot of different mistakes that can happen. So that's the only thing that we won't do in-house. Joe, I don't think I've missed anything, but if you want to add.
No, but that's something that's been a priority of mine for a long time. And when Catherine got here, I said that was probably one of the first things we were going to task her with. The 2 things was trying to get us from the QuickBooks desktop version to QuickBooks Online. And I think she did that like literally within her first 2 weeks. And the other one was we need to be able to take credit cards. I sit here right by the door all day, every business owner, every contractor, they walk in the door, do you take credit cards? Do you take credit cards? Do you take credit cards? And we will finally be able to take credit cards. So I'm thrilled to have that. It's going to make it so much easier and convenient for people to do business with the town. And as Catherine said, it does create additional opportunities for bringing about more efficiency with online payments and other steps that we'll look at in the future. So we really appreciate her effort and Nicole's effort in making that a reality. And don't mute yourself yet, because I also will ask you, I know last year we had talked about having an orientation program for council after the election, and we had such a short, condensed period in which to do it. I mean, we really just didn't even have a chance to do it. With the new ordinance and the new swearing in date taking place in January, we basically have 60 days to kind of transition and orient the one new council member that we'll have. But Catherine has put together a orientation program for council members. We will open that up for anyone who would like to take it. I assume Dan will probably want to participate just to get up to speed, but if any member of council would like to take advantage of the orientation program, we'll certainly give you an opportunity to do that. Catherine, I know I've kind of given this to you unannounced, but can you just give kind of a brief update on what you've put together?
Sure. So what I did was I took kind of our core ordinances and made them all into one condensed space for everybody to review. And that includes our form of government, what powers council has, what powers the mayor has. I'll even update it with the new ordinance after it 2021-14 for the town administrator. And it also goes over your staff functions as well and kind of who are your key personnel. And if you've got questions for that person, this is who you go to. Some other things I included are the State Ethics Act and the Freedom of Information Act, kind of going over what you need to do with the state for the Ethics Act, reporting, the do's and don'ts for the Freedom of Information Act as well, kind of going over that synopsis. And then at the back, I kind of added, like, I called it an appendix. It's a little bit of a binder. And I included the Municipal Association's handbook, which is just the general overview of powers of council, government throughout the state. It's what they usually go through all of the online training courses. So you can reference that at any point in time. I did this at Folly and I updated it like every time that there was an edit. And so like I handed out old binders, I handed out new binders to current council members that were reappointed just so that they had the most up-to-date information. And I kind of condense it in a little bit of a PowerPoint slide. We can even do it virtually, or I can just hand you the book. And if you've got questions, you can always come to me. It just depends on how you'd like to do it.
So that was a big undertaking. I think we would all agree, long overdue, and appreciate Catherine taking the initiative on that and putting everything together for our new, and if anyone wants it, existing council members. So certainly encourage all of you to take advantage of that. One last item, just a quick update. You'll probably remember a couple of weeks ago, we put out a notice that the Seafields turn lane construction was going to start last week. They ran into a couple issues. The very first night they were out working in Seabrook Island Road. They'd gone and set up the lane closure, implemented the traffic plan. The first night they brought in I think they called it a vac truck. They were looking for depth of underground utilities and things of that nature. Everything, I'll say everything was supposed to have been marked along that corridor. As is not uncommon, we found out everything was not marked along that corridor. They ran into a couple lines that they've since had to go back and try to identify. We were able to determine one of them was our irrigation line. But there was, I think, maybe an AT&T or some other line. The other issue they ran into is it was super wet out there. So the last thing you want to do when you're paving a road is to pave it over a bad base. So, excuse me, they're currently on hold pending final review of utilities. I know with the king tides that we've had this year, that doesn't help dry that area out one bit. But at some point, once we get notification from them that they are going to go back and reinitiate that work, we will certainly pass that along to council and to the community as well. And just a reminder, all that work is scheduled to be done at night. I believe starts after 8 p.m. They start doing the traffic control at 7, but they'll start actually doing the work after 8 p.m. They would have to be concluded by 6 a.m. So all the work will take place during the overnight hours. So it should be a fairly minimal impact. And one other thing with the delay with that is, as they've been clearing the property, because there's not a turn lane, all of the vegetation and debris is having to go out through fresh fields, so not onto Seabrook Island Road. So I guess that's one small benefit of not having that turn lane in place at this time. But they are still planning on moving forward. Obviously, we're just waiting on an update from them on when they expect to be back out for the grading and paving. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Joe. We've managed to get all the way through the entire agenda. And before I call for adjournment, is there anything that any other member of council would like to bring to our attention? Thank you. Hearing no response, I will now ask for a motion to adjourn the Ways and Means Committee meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify your approval by saying aye.
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 That was unanimous, Joe. So we are now adjourned. Thank you very much.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Next Tuesday.
Okay.